The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as the city awakened to a day that would be etched in history forever. Streets that were usually bustling with the regular rhythm of daily life now thrummed with an electric energy that could be felt in every corner. People from all walks of life had gathered, some camping overnight on pavements, wrapped in sleeping bags decorated with Union flags, their faces painted with red, white, and blue. The air smelled of fresh tea from street vendors and the sweet aroma of pastries being sold to the eager crowds. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was quite different but equally charged with anticipation. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before a tall mirror in her private dressing room, watching as her stylist made the final adjustments to her ivory gown. The dress was a masterpiece of British craftsmanship, featuring intricate embroidery that told stories through its delicate patterns. Each stitch had been placed with care, representing the unity of the nation and the rich heritage that would be celebrated today. William moved through the palace corridors with purpose, though his mind wandered to the significance of what lay ahead. He had always known this day would come, had prepared for it his entire life, yet the reality of it still felt surreal. He thought of his grandmother, of her steady presence during her own coronation decades ago, and wondered if she had felt this same mixture of pride and responsibility coursing through her veins. In the nursery wing, a different kind of preparation was taking place. Prince George, now older and more aware of his future role, stood still as his outfit was being pressed one final time. He had been briefed on the day's proceedings, on where he would sit and when he would need to stand. His young face carried a seriousness beyond his years, though his eyes occasionally sparkled with the excitement that any child would feel about such a grand occasion. Princess Charlotte twirled in front of her own mirror, admiring how her dress moved with her. She had been involved in choosing certain elements of her outfit, a small privilege that made her feel grown up and important. Her hair had been styled beautifully with small accessories that caught the light. She practiced her curtsy one more time, determined to get it absolutely perfect. Prince Louis, the youngest of the three, was finding it harder to contain his energy. He bounced from foot to foot as his nanny helped him with his formal attire, asking questions about everything he could see from the window. The crowds, the flags, the horses being prepared in the distance, all of it fascinated him. His siblings had tried to explain what would happen during the ceremony, but at his age it all seemed like an elaborate game. Catherine finally stepped back from the mirror, taking a deep breath. The weight of her jewelry was something she had grown accustomed to over the years, but today felt different. Today, every piece she wore carried the weight of history. Her tiara, borrowed from the royal collection, had been worn by queens before her. It represented continuity, the passing of tradition from one generation to the next. William joined her in the corridor, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words were needed. They had been through so much together, faced scrutiny and celebration in equal measure, and had always found strength in their partnership. Today would be another step in their shared journey, one that would be witnessed by millions around the world. The children were brought to join their parents, each looking remarkably composed despite the enormity of the occasion. George stood straight, his hands clasped in front of him in a pose that mirrored his father's. Charlotte beamed with excitement, though she tried to appear dignified. Louis held his mother's hand tightly, seeking comfort in her familiar presence. A senior aide approached with a gentle reminder about the timing. The procession would begin soon, and they needed to make their way to the carriages. The family moved together through the palace, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Staff members lined the hallways, offering respectful nods and quiet words of encouragement. Some had served the royal family for decades and felt genuinely moved by the sight of this new generation taking their place in history. Outside, the state coach awaited them, its golden exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Horses stood patiently, their coats brushed to perfection, their ceremonial tack checked and rechecked. The coachmen, dressed in their finest livery, waited with practiced patience. Security personnel maintained a discreet but constant presence, ensuring every detail of the departure would proceed smoothly. Catherine helped Louis into the carriage first, making sure he was comfortable and could see out of the windows. George followed with quiet confidence, taking his designated seat with care. Charlotte needed no assistance, climbing in gracefully and arranging her dress around her. William exchanged a final word with one of his protection officers before joining his family inside the carriage. The interior of the coach was luxurious, yet intimate, creating a small bubble of privacy amid the public spectacle. Through the windows they could see people pressed against barriers, phones and cameras raised high, everyone hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. The noise from outside was muffled but constant, a reminder of the thousands who had come to witness this historic moment. As the carriage began to move, pulled by the magnificent horses, a roar went up from the crowd. Charlotte waved enthusiastically, her earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of the moment. George waved too, more measured in his movements, conscious of the example he was setting. Louis pressed his face against the window, amazed by the sea of people and flags stretching as far as he could see. Catherine kept one hand on Louis's shoulder, a gentle anchor, while with her other hand she waved to the crowds. She had learned over the years to find individual faces in the masses, to make eye contact when possible, to make people feel seen and acknowledged. William did the same, his expression warm and grateful for the support shown by so many. The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned with precision, winding through streets that held centuries of royal history. Every turn revealed new crowds, new displays of pageantry, new expressions of celebration. The morning light played across the ancient buildings, creating shadows and highlights that seemed to dance with the movement of the procession. Inside the carriage, despite the formal nature of the occasion, there were small moments of ordinary family life. Catherine adjusted Charlotte's hair when a strand fell out of place. William steadied Louis when the carriage hit a small bump in the road. George pointed out landmarks he recognized from previous visits to London, sharing his knowledge with his younger siblings. The journey that lasted only minutes felt both fleeting and eternal, each second packed with meaning and emotion that would be remembered for lifetimes to come. The carriage slowed as it approached Westminster Abbey, the ancient structure rising before them like a sentinel of history. Its Gothic spires reached toward the sky, and its weathered stones had witnessed countless coronations, weddings, and moments of national significance. Today it would add another chapter to its remarkable story. As the family prepared to disembark, Catherine took a moment to look at each of her children. She smoothed down George's collar one final time and gave Charlotte an encouraging smile. Louis, sensing the shift in atmosphere, became quieter and more observant. The carriage door opened and the sound of the crowd grew louder, mixing with the ceremonial music that had begun to play. William stepped out first, his bearing regal yet approachable. The crowds erupted in cheers as he appeared, and he acknowledged them with a wave before turning to help his family exit the carriage. Catherine emerged next, and the sight of her took the breath away from many onlookers. Her gown caught the light beautifully, and her composure was absolute. She reached back to take Louis's hand as he carefully navigated the carriage steps. George followed with admirable steadiness, remembering all the guidance he had received about how to conduct himself. Charlotte came last, and as her feet touched the ground, she looked up at the magnificent abbey with wonder in her eyes. For all the preparation, for all the rehearsals, nothing could quite prepare them for the reality of this moment. The family paused at the entrance, allowing the photographers to capture the image that would grace newspapers and magazines around the world. Behind them, other members of the royal family were arriving, each in their own carriages, each playing their part in this carefully choreographed day. The air was filled with the sound of bells ringing from churches across London, a joyful announcement that the ceremony was about to begin. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere was hushed and reverent. Light filtered through the stained glass windows, creating pools of colored light on the ancient stone floor. The space was filled with guests who represented nations from around the globe, dignitaries and royals, politicians and religious leaders, all united in witnessing this historic occasion. The scent of flowers filled the air, arrangements that had taken days to perfect now providing beauty and fragrance to the sacred space. Catherine walked beside William, her hand lightly resting on his arm. The children followed closely, their earlier excitement tempered now by the solemnity of their surroundings. George looked straight ahead, his young face serious and focused. Charlotte held her dress carefully, mindful of not stepping on the hem. Louis stayed close to his mother, his earlier energy transformed into quiet attentiveness. As they processed down the aisle, familiar faces turned to watch them. Family members offered subtle nods of encouragement, Foreign royals observed with interest and respect. The congregation stood in honor of their arrival, the rustling of fabric and shuffling of feet creating a soft symphony of movement. Catherine recognized many people, friends and colleagues from years of public service, and their presence provided comfort amid the formality. The music swelled as they reached their designated seats, a position that afforded them a clear view of the ceremony that was about to unfold. The children settled into their places with remarkable poise. George sat tall, knowing that cameras would be focused on him throughout the service. Charlotte folded her hands in her lap, mimicking her mother's graceful posture. Louis looked around with wide eyes, taking in every detail of the magnificent space. William leaned slightly toward Catherine, and though no words were spoken, the gesture conveyed volumes. They were in this together as they had always been. Whatever the day would bring, whatever responsibilities would be placed upon them, they would face it as partners. Catherine's slight smile in response was barely noticeable to others, but to William it spoke of understanding and solidarity. The final guests took their seats, and a hush fell over the abbey. The moment everyone had been waiting for was at hand. The ceremonial music changed, becoming grander and more majestic. Every eye turned toward the entrance, where the focal point of the entire day was about to make an entrance. The weight of 1,000 years of tradition seemed to press down on the assembled crowd, reminding them that they were not just observers but participants in living history. Catherine reached over and gently adjusted Louis's position as he began to fidget slightly. The boy looked up at his mother and saw the gentle reminder in her eyes to remain still and attentive. He nodded slightly and straightened up, determined to make his family proud. Charlotte noticed this exchange and felt a surge of protective affection for her little brother, understanding how hard it must be for him to sit still for so long. The abbey's acoustics carried every sound with crystal clarity. The soft rustle of programs, the distant echo of footsteps on stone, the breathing of hundreds of people all focused on the same moment. Outside, millions were watching on screens large and small, in homes and public spaces across time zones and continents. But inside these ancient walls, time seemed to slow down, each second stretching out to accommodate the magnitude of what was occurring. George thought about his future, about the lessons he had learned regarding duty and service. He was young, but he understood that his life would be different from that of other children. Watching the ceremony unfold before him, he began to truly grasp what that meant. It was both daunting and inspiring, a future that was written yet still unformed, traditional yet evolving. William remembered his own childhood experiences at royal events, the mixture of boredom and fascination, the struggle to sit still and behave appropriately. He felt a surge of pride as he watched his own children conducting themselves so well. They were ready for this, as ready as anyone could be for a life lived partly in the public eye. And Catherine, with her steady presence and natural grace, had prepared them beautifully. As the ceremony progressed, each ritual carried the weight of centuries. The symbols used, the words spoken, the music played, all of it connected this moment to countless others that had come before. Yet there was also something uniquely contemporary about it, a recognition that while tradition was honored, the monarchy was also evolving to reflect modern values and expectations. Catherine watched the proceedings with both reverence and analytical observation. She understood that she was witnessing not just history being made, but history being continued. Every generation brought its own interpretation, its own style, its own contribution to the ongoing story of the nation and its institutions. The children remained remarkably focused, though Catherine noticed small signs of fatigue beginning to show in Louis. She caught his eye and gave him an encouraging smile, silently communicating that he was doing wonderfully and that she was proud of him. This small gesture renewed his determination to see the ceremony through with dignity. The climactic moment of the ceremony approached, and the entire abbey seemed to hold its collective breath. The choir's voices rose in harmony, filling the vaulted space with sound that seemed almost otherworldly. Catherine glanced at William and saw the emotion playing across his features. This was his father's moment, but it was also a moment that defined their own future and that of their children. George leaned forward slightly, not wanting to miss any detail of what was happening. He had studied the ceremony in his lessons, understood its significance in theory, but seeing it unfold in reality was entirely different. The regalia, the robes, the ancient crown being lifted with reverence. Each element contributed to a spectacle that was both deeply spiritual and magnificently theatrical. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have explained exactly why. Perhaps it was the beauty of the music or the solemnity of the moment, or simply the overwhelming sense that something profound was occurring. She blinked them back, not wanting to draw attention to herself, and focused on maintaining the composure that had been instilled in her through years of preparation. Louis had grown quieter as the ceremony progressed, overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. He pressed against his mother's side, seeking comfort in her familiar presence. Catherine wrapped her arm around him discreetly, providing reassurance while maintaining her own dignified posture. She understood that for a child his age, this was an extraordinary challenge, and she was immensely proud of how well he had handled it. The moment arrived when the crown was placed, and it was as if the entire world paused. The symbolic weight of that crown represented more than jewels and gold. It represented service, duty, and an unbreakable covenant with the people. William felt the significance of it deeply, knowing that one day he would bear that same weight, and after him, his son George would carry it forward into yet another generation. The fanfare that followed was jubilant, a release of the tension that had built throughout the ceremony. The congregation erupted in carefully controlled celebration, voices joining in the traditional acclamations that had been spoken at coronations for centuries. The sound echoed off the stone walls, multiplying and amplifying until it felt as though the very building was joining in the celebration. Catherine maintained her composure even as emotions swirled within her. She thought of the long journey that had brought them to this moment, the years of learning and adaptation, the joys and challenges of royal life. She thought of the future that lay ahead, the responsibilities that would come and the changes they would witness. But mostly she focused on the present, on being fully in this historic moment with her family. As the ceremony transitioned to its concluding phases, the family prepared for their next role in the day's events. There would be more processions, more public appearances, more opportunities to connect with the crowds who had shown such dedication in coming to witness this occasion. George straightened his shoulders, readying himself. Charlotte checked that her dress was still perfect. Louis looked to his parents for guidance on what would come next. The recessional music began, stately and grand, and the newly crowned figures began their journey back down the aisle. William and Catherine rose, helping the children to their feet. They joined the procession, walking in carefully prescribed order, their movements observed by everyone present and by millions watching around the world. Each step was measured, dignified, part of the choreography that made these events so memorable. Exiting the abbey felt like emerging from one world into another. Inside had been hushed and sacred, heavy with tradition and ritual. Outside was bright and loud, filled with the energy of thousands of people celebrating. The contrast was striking, almost disorienting. The children blinked in the sunlight, adjusting to the change after the dimmer interior of the abbey. The crowds had grown even larger during the ceremony, if that was possible. People stood 10 deep behind barriers, waving flags and cheering with unrestrained enthusiasm. The noise was tremendous, a wave of sound that crashed over the royal party as they made their way toward the carriages. Catherine waved continuously, her smile genuine and warm, acknowledging the support and affection being shown. George found himself smiling despite his earlier nerves. The joy of the crowd was infectious, and he could feel their genuine happiness. He waved with more enthusiasm now, no longer quite so worried about doing everything perfectly. Charlotte was in her element, enjoying every moment of the public attention while still maintaining the grace she had been taught. Louis, reinvigorated by the fresh air and excitement, waved enthusiastically at everyone he could see. William helped his family into the carriage, making sure everyone was comfortable before settling in himself. The return journey would take them through different streets, offering even more people the chance to see them and be part of the celebration. The route had been published weeks in advance, allowing people to choose their viewing spots and claim them early. As the carriage began to move, the family relaxed slightly. They had made it through the most formal and challenging part of the day successfully. Now they could enjoy the celebration more fully, take in the sights and sounds of a city transformed by pageantry and joy. The weight of the ceremony began to lift, replaced by a lighter feeling of accomplishment and relief. The procession moved at a stately pace, allowing ample time for viewing and for the family to wave to well-wishers. Street performers had positioned themselves along the route, adding to the festive atmosphere. Musicians played, acrobats performed, and artists had created elaborate displays that honored the occasion. It was a citywide party, and the royal family were the guests of honor. Catherine pointed out interesting sights to the children, making sure they were fully experiencing and appreciating this remarkable day. She wanted them to remember not just the formal ceremony, but also the warmth and enthusiasm of the people, the sense of connection between the royal family and the public they served. These were lessons that could not be taught in a classroom or through books. They had to be lived and felt. William watched the crowds with deep gratitude. He understood that their support was not automatic or guaranteed, but earned through service and dedication. Days like this were a privilege, a chance to celebrate together, but they also carried responsibility. The cheering crowds represented millions of people whose lives the royal family touched, directly or indirectly, and whose trust had to be continually earned and maintained. The carriage turned onto the Mall, the final stretch before Buckingham Palace. This iconic avenue was packed with people, the crowd so dense it seemed impossible that one more person could fit. Yet somehow they all managed, pressed together but united in their purpose of witnessing and celebrating this historic day. The sea of faces seemed endless, each one hoping for a moment of connection with the passing procession. Buckingham Palace loomed ahead, its familiar facade decorated with banners and flags for the occasion. The building had been home to monarchs for generations, and today it would serve as the setting for the next phase of the celebration. As the carriage approached the gates, the cheering reached a crescendo, people straining against barriers for one last glimpse of the royal family before they disappeared inside. The courtyard provided a brief respite from the public gaze. Staff members waited to assist with the family's arrival, their faces reflecting the joy of the occasion. Catherine took a moment to kneel down and speak quietly with Louis, checking how he was feeling and praising him for his excellent behavior throughout the morning. His tired face broke into a proud smile, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the glow of his mother's approval. George and Charlotte walked ahead with their father, discussing what they had seen and experienced. William listened to their observations with interest, pleased by their thoughtful comments and the maturity they were showing. Charlotte was already talking about the next appearance on the balcony, excited about seeing the crowds from that famous viewpoint. George was more reserved, but clearly processing everything he had witnessed, storing it away as another lesson in what his future would hold. Inside the palace, there was a carefully orchestrated buzz of activity. Staff members moved with purpose, preparing for the next phase of the day's events. Refreshments had been laid out in one of the private rooms, a chance for the family to regroup and recharge before the balcony appearance. The children were especially grateful for this break, their energy beginning to flag after the long morning. Catherine slipped off her heels for a few precious minutes, flexing her feet with relief. The price of beautiful formal shoes was always discomfort, but she bore it with grace. She accepted a glass of water and took a long drink, realizing only then how thirsty she had been. William loosened his collar slightly, just enough to feel more comfortable without appearing disheveled. An aide appeared to brief them on the timing for the balcony appearance. The flypast would occur at a specific time, weather permitting, and they needed to be in position to witness it with the crowds. The children perked up at the mention of the planes. This was something they had been looking forward to, a spectacular aerial display that would cap off the day's public celebrations. George asked intelligent questions about the different aircraft that would be involved, demonstrating the knowledge he had gained from his studies. Charlotte wanted to know how long they would need to stand on the balcony, and whether she would be able to wave the entire time. Louis was most interested in whether there would be loud noises from the planes, showing both excitement and a hint of nervousness about what was to come. The family made their way through the palace corridors toward the famous balcony room. The walls were lined with portraits of ancestors who had stood on that same balcony during their own significant moments. Catherine often felt the weight of that history, the sense of continuity and connection across generations. Today that feeling was particularly strong, as they prepared to step onto a stage that had seen so many historic moments. Through the windows, they could hear the crowd gathered outside. The sound was constant, a background hum of thousands of conversations punctuated by occasional cheers or chants. People had claimed their spots hours ago, some even camping overnight to ensure a good view. Their dedication was humbling, a reminder of the deep connection between the monarchy and the people it served. The moment approached for them to step onto the balcony. William gathered his family around him for a brief moment of privacy before they faced the public again. He spoke quietly, thanking them for their comportment during the ceremony and reminding them that this final public appearance was important. They would wave, watch the fly past, and give the people the celebration they had come to witness. Catherine adjusted Charlotte's hair one more time and straightened Louis's collar. George needed no such attention. He had already checked himself and stood ready, his young face set with determination to finish the day as strongly as he had started it. The family formed up in the order they would appear, took collective deep breaths, and moved toward the balcony doors. The roar that greeted their appearance was deafening. The vast space in front of Buckingham Palace was packed with humanity, a sea of faces stretching as far as the eye could see. Flags waved, cameras flashed, and the cheering intensified as each member of the family stepped into view. The children's eyes widened at the sight. They had seen large crowds before, but nothing quite compared to this. William and Catherine positioned themselves at the front, with the children arranged beside them. They began to wave, and the crowd's enthusiasm grew even more intense if that was possible. Catherine found herself genuinely moved by the display of affection and support. She had learned over the years not to take such moments for granted, to appreciate the privilege of experiencing them. Charlotte waved with both hands, her face alight with joy. She loved these public moments, the chance to connect with people and feel their warmth. George waved more formally, conscious of his position but no less sincere in his acknowledgement of the crowd. Louis alternated between waving and pointing at things he saw in the crowd, his natural exuberance shining through despite his earlier tiredness. The family stood together, united in this moment of celebration. Behind them, other members of the royal family had gathered, creating a tableau that would be captured in countless photographs and remembered for years to come. The balcony appearance was brief but powerful, a symbolic moment of connection between the monarchy and the people. Then came the announcement they had all been waiting for. The flypast was approaching. The crowd's attention shifted skyward, necks craning to catch the first glimpse of the aircraft. The family also looked up, sharing in the anticipation. In the distance, the sound of engines could be heard, growing steadily louder. The first planes appeared, flying in perfect formation. The historic aircraft came first, a tribute to the past and the role of the military in the nation's history. Their vintage engines produced a distinctive sound that spoke of different era. George watched with fascination, identifying each type of plane as it passed overhead. Charlotte squealed with delight at the sight, all pretense of formal dignity forgotten in her excitement. Modern jets followed, sleek and powerful, demonstrating the current capabilities of the armed forces. They roared overhead in tight formation, their precision a testament to the skill of the pilots. The noise was tremendous, and Louis covered his ears but kept his eyes fixed on the spectacular display. Catherine kept a protective hand on his back, making sure he felt secure while still able to enjoy the moment. The finale was the most impressive, a massive formation that filled the sky, aircraft of all types flying together in a coordinated display of aerial prowess. Red, white, and blue smoke trailed behind some of the planes, painting the national colors across the sky. The crowd erupted in fresh cheers, and the family waved with renewed enthusiasm. As the last planes disappeared from view, the family remained on the balcony for a few more minutes, savoring the moment and giving the crowd one final opportunity to celebrate together. Then, with final waves, they stepped back inside, the public portion of the day finally complete. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The formal requirements of the day were complete, and the family could finally relax into a more private celebration. The children's energy, which had been carefully controlled all day, was finally released. Louis ran ahead down the corridor, his earlier fatigue forgotten in the relief of being out of public view. Charlotte kicked off her formal shoes with an exaggerated sigh of relief, and even George allowed himself to loosen his tie. Catherine laughed at their antics, understanding perfectly the need to let loose after hours of maintaining perfect behavior. She herself felt the weight lifting from her shoulders, though she still carried herself with the grace that had become second nature. William caught her eye and smiled, a private moment of shared understanding between them. They had done it, guided their children through one of the most significant days in recent royal history, and everyone had performed beautifully. A private lunch had been prepared for the immediate family, a chance to gather away from cameras and public scrutiny. The dining room was set informally by royal standards, though still impressive by any normal measure. The children settled around the table with relief, finally able to sit without worrying about how they looked or who was watching. The conversation flowed naturally as they ate, replaying moments from the day. Charlotte described her favorite part, the moment when she first saw the crowds from the carriage window and realized just how many people had come. George spoke thoughtfully about the ceremony itself, asking questions about the symbolism and meaning behind different elements. Louis mostly focused on the flypast, recreating airplane noises between bites of food. William and Catherine exchanged amused glances as they listened to their children process the day's events. These were the moments they treasured most, when they could just be a family, without the formality and protocol that governed so much of their lives. The children were allowed to be themselves, speaking freely and expressing their feelings without the usual constraints. Staff members entered periodically to clear plates and bring new courses, but they moved quietly and efficiently, understanding the family's need for relative privacy. The meal was delicious, though in truth everyone was too excited and talked out to pay much attention to the food. It was more about being together, decompressing from the intensity of the morning. After lunch, the children were given permission to change out of their formal attire and into more comfortable clothes. The relief on their faces was palpable as they scattered to their respective rooms. Catherine followed more slowly, equally eager to trade her beautiful but restrictive gown for something more practical. The tiara came off first, carefully placed on its stand, and she massaged her scalp where it had pressed against her head. William joined her in their private sitting room, both of them finally able to truly relax. They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments, processing everything that had happened. The day had been perfect, but it had also been exhausting in ways that were hard to explain to anyone who had not experienced it themselves. Catherine reflected on how far they had come as a family. She remembered her own nerves when she first joined the royal family, the learning curve that had seemed impossibly steep at times. Now she was helping her own children navigate similar challenges, drawing on her experience to guide them. Watching them today had filled her with pride. They were ready for the roles they would eventually assume. The children returned, now dressed in casual clothes that allowed them to move freely. The transformation was remarkable, from formal young royals to regular kids in moments. They brought with them an energy and enthusiasm that had been suppressed during the formal events. Louis immediately started demonstrating his version of the ceremony, complete with exaggerated bowing and a makeshift crown made from a cushion. George and Charlotte joined in the impromptu performance, their earlier seriousness giving way to giggles and playfulness. William and Catherine watched with delight, grateful that despite everything, their children could still be children. These private family moments were precious, a chance to maintain normalcy in a far from normal existence. As afternoon faded toward evening, the family gathered in front of a television to watch news coverage of the day's events. It was surreal seeing themselves on screen, watching replays of moments they had lived just hours before. The commentators spoke glowingly about their appearance and behavior, particularly praising how well the children had conducted themselves. Charlotte was fascinated by seeing herself on television, watching her own waves and movements with critical interest. George was more interested in the wider context, the crowd shots, the ceremonial details, the historical significance that the experts were discussing. Louis lost interest quickly and returned to playing, his attention span for watching himself exhausted. Catherine and William watched more analytically, noting what had worked well and what might be adjusted for future events. They were always learning, always looking for ways to improve and better fulfill their roles. But mostly they felt satisfaction at a job well done, a significant milestone successfully navigated. Phone calls started coming in from family members and friends, people wanting to congratulate them and share their own observations of the day. Catherine took several calls, speaking warmly with people who had attended the ceremony or watched from afar. William did the same, his conversations mixing personal warmth with discussions of how various aspects of the day had unfolded. Social media was exploding with images and commentary about the family's appearance. Staff members provided periodic updates on the public reaction, which was overwhelmingly positive. People had particularly loved seeing the children, their genuine expressions and occasional fidgets making them relatable and endearing. The careful balance between maintaining dignity and showing authentic humanity had been perfectly struck. As dinner time approached, the children's energy finally began to wane. The adrenaline that had carried them through the day was fading, replaced by genuine tiredness. Catherine noticed Louis rubbing his eyes and suggested that perhaps an early bedtime might be welcome. To her surprise, none of the children protested, a sure sign of just how exhausted they were. The bedtime routine that evening was more elaborate than usual, with all three children wanting to talk about the day as they prepared for sleep. Catherine and William moved between rooms, giving each child individual time to discuss their experiences and feelings. These conversations were important, helping the children process what they had been part of and understand its significance. George wanted to know more about what would be expected of him in the future, the ceremony having brought his own eventual role into sharper focus. William spoke honestly with him about the responsibilities and privileges that came with their position, careful to be truthful without being overwhelming. He emphasized that George would have years to prepare and that his family would always support him. Charlotte was full of questions about the details, why people wore certain things, what specific gestures meant, how decisions were made about who stood where. Catherine answered patiently, impressed by her daughter's observational skills and genuine interest. Charlotte was developing her own understanding of royal life, seeing beyond the surface to the complexities underneath. Louis simply wanted reassurance that they would do more fun things together as a family. The formality of the day had impressed upon him how different their life was from what he saw other families doing, and he needed to know that they could still be normal sometimes. Catherine hugged him close and promised that there would be plenty of regular family time, trips to the park, games at home, and ordinary moments that had nothing to do with crowns or ceremonies. As the children finally drifted off to sleep, Catherine and William found themselves alone together for the first time since early morning. They returned to their private quarters, both feeling the pleasant exhaustion that comes from a day well lived. The palace around them was settling into its evening rhythm, staff members completing their duties, security making their rounds, the building itself seeming to exhale after the intensity of the celebration. They stood at the window, looking out over London. The city was still alive with celebration, lights twinkling in the distance and the faint sounds of continued festivities drifting up to them. Somewhere out there, people were still talking about the day, sharing photos, reliving favorite moments. The impact of what had occurred would ripple outward for days, weeks, even years to come. William put his arm around Catherine, and she leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. They had faced this day as partners, supporting each other and their children through every moment. Their relationship had always been their greatest strength, and days like this reinforced why that partnership was so essential. Neither of them could have managed alone what they accomplished together. Catherine thought about the years ahead, the challenges and opportunities that awaited their family. The children would grow and their roles would evolve. There would be more ceremonies, more public appearances, more moments of historic significance. But there would also be private joys, family holidays, personal milestones, and the quiet satisfaction of service performed with dedication and care. William was thinking along similar lines, his mind already planning ahead while also savoring the present moment. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a deep sense of purpose. This was what they had prepared for, what they had chosen to dedicate their lives to. And having Catherine beside him, having their children growing into their own understanding of service and duty, made it all worthwhile. The day had been perfect in its own way, not without challenges, not without moments of nervousness or fatigue, but ultimately successful and meaningful. The family had shown the nation and the world who they were, dedicated, united, genuine, and ready for whatever the future might bring. The images captured today would become part of history, studied and remembered long after everyone present had passed on. As they prepared for bed themselves, Both Catherine and William felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to serve, for the support of the people, for their healthy and wonderful children, and for each other. The coronation was over, but their journey continued, and they faced it with confidence and hope for all the days to come. Morning light filtered through the curtains, gentler than the previous day's brilliant sunshine. The palace was quieter now, the frenetic energy of Coronation Day replaced by a calmer but still purposeful atmosphere. Catherine woke early, as was her habit, and lay for a moment reflecting on how quickly extraordinary days become memories. Yesterday's events already felt both immediate and distant, like something she had lived through and watched simultaneously. William was still sleeping beside her, his face peaceful and untroubled. She watched him for a moment, thinking about how much they had been through together, how their partnership had strengthened over the years. Days like yesterday tested them in unique ways, but they also reinforced the foundation they had built. She slipped quietly from bed, not wanting to disturb his rest, and made her way to check on the children. George was awake in his room, already dressed in casual clothes and reading a book about British history. He looked up as his mother entered and smiled, a more relaxed expression than the formal composure he had maintained throughout the previous day. They talked quietly about what he was reading, and Catherine was pleased to see him connecting yesterday's experiences with broader historical context. He was processing the event thoughtfully, making sense of his place in the continuing story. Charlotte was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, one arm thrown over her favorite stuffed animal. She looked younger in sleep, reminding Catherine that despite her daughter's poise and maturity during public events, she was still a child who needed protection and nurturing. Catherine adjusted the blanket carefully and left her to rest, knowing she had earned every minute of peaceful sleep. Louis was awake but staying in bed, playing quietly with toys he had arranged on the covers. He brightened when he saw his mother and immediately launched into an elaborate story about the adventures his toy planes were having. Catherine listened with genuine interest, asking questions and making appropriate responses. This was the gift of relative normalcy after major events, the chance to return to simple, everyday interactions that grounded them all. Breakfast was informal, served in one of the smaller family dining rooms rather than any of the grand staterooms. The children trickled in one by one as they woke and dressed, joining their parents at the table. The conversation was light and easy, touching on plans for the coming days, questions about homework for George, Charlotte's upcoming activities, and Louis's endless commentary on anything that crossed his mind. William read sections of the newspapers aloud, sharing particularly good reviews or interesting photographs from the day before. The coverage was extensive and largely positive, with commentators praising both the grandeur of the ceremony and the warmth the family had displayed. Catherine looked at some of the photos and marveled at how different they appeared from how the moments had felt from the inside. Staff members brought updates on the public reaction, which continued to be overwhelmingly supportive. Social media metrics showed massive engagement, with images of the family being shared millions of times across platforms. Letters and messages were already arriving by the thousands, people writing to express their joy at having witnessed the historic day or to compliment the children's behavior. The family spent the mid-morning together in one of the private sitting rooms, a rare luxury of unscheduled time. Catherine worked on some correspondence while keeping half an eye on the children as they played. William caught up on official papers that had accumulated, while his attention was focused on the coronation. George helped Louis with a puzzle, showing patience and kindness that made his parents proud. Charlotte sat with a sketchbook, drawing her interpretation of the previous day's events. Her artistic style was developing, showing genuine talent and a good eye for detail. She had captured the essence of the Abbey, the crowds, even the expressions on her family members' faces. Catherine looked over her daughter's shoulder and praised her work, making mental notes to encourage this creative outlet. By afternoon, the children were growing restless with indoor activities and requested permission to go outside. The palace gardens offered privacy and space to run and play without public observation. Catherine accompanied them, grateful for the fresh air and the chance to watch them being completely themselves. They raced across the lawns, climbed trees under supervision, and played elaborate games of their own invention. William joined them later, bringing a football and initiating an impromptu game that had all three children shrieking with laughter. Catherine watched from a bench, her heart full at the sight of her family simply enjoying each other's company. These moments mattered as much as any state occasion, perhaps more so. They were the foundation that made everything else possible. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they returned inside for tea, a quintessentially British ritual that the family observed when schedules allowed. The children had worked up appetites from their outdoor play and attacked the sandwiches and cakes with enthusiasm. The conversation remained easy and natural, touching on topics ranging from school to friends to plans for upcoming holidays. Evening brought a gradual wind down, the children beginning to show signs of tiredness despite having rested more than usual the night before. The emotional intensity of the Coronation Day had taken a toll that couldn't be completely recovered in just one night of sleep. Catherine instituted an early bedtime again, meeting minimal resistance from children who were ready to rest. The bedtime routines were gentler tonight, without the processing of major events that had occupied the previous evening. Stories were read, goodnight kisses exchanged, and prayers said. Louis asked if they could watch videos of the coronation again soon, wanting to relive the excitement. Charlotte wondered when the next big royal event would be. George simply expressed satisfaction at being home and able to relax. As William and Catherine finally settled into their own evening, they talked about how well the children had adjusted back to normal life. There was a concern with raising children in such unique circumstances that they might struggle to maintain balance. But so far, their efforts to provide both structure and normalcy seemed to be working. The children understood their responsibilities but weren't overwhelmed by them. The conversation turned to future plans and responsibilities. There were upcoming engagements already scheduled, causes that needed attention, and the ongoing work of representing the monarchy in a modern age. But there was also a renewed commitment to protecting family time, to ensuring the children had as normal a childhood as possible given their circumstances. Catherine reflected on her own journey from private citizen to central figure in one of the world's most famous families. It had been challenging, sometimes overwhelming, but ultimately rewarding. She had found her role, developed her own style of service, and had been accepted by the public in ways she had hardly dared hope for in the beginning. Now she was helping her children navigate similar paths, armed with hard-won wisdom and experience. William thought about the legacy they were building, not just for their children, but for the institution they represented. The monarchy had survived and thrived by adapting to changing times while maintaining core values. Their generation's contribution would be continuing that evolution, finding new ways to remain relevant and useful to the nation while honoring centuries of tradition. The palace settled into nighttime quiet around them. Security staff maintained their vigilant watch. Household staff completed final tasks before retiring. Outside, London continued its endless rhythm. The city that had celebrated so exuberantly yesterday now returned to its usual bustling self. But the memory of the coronation would linger, a bright spot in the collective consciousness, a moment when history paused to acknowledge continuity and change. Catherine and William stood once more at their window, looking out over the darkened grounds. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to serve. But tonight they were simply grateful, for each other, for their children, for the privilege of their position, and for the support of millions who had shared in their historic day. The coronation was complete, but their story continued, written day by day through service, dedication, and love. The future stretched ahead, unknown but faced with confidence, ready to meet whatever it might bring with grace, dignity, and unwavering commitment to the roles they had been born or chosen to fulfill.